Hello, good morning, everybody. And this is DV Dronam Raju. I am the CEO and founder of InfoSecEnforcer. Today, we have Brad Hammer with us on the call to do a review of CCPA privacy policy. And we're taking example of Zoom to do that review. And hopefully, you're all trying to get your CCPA compliance done by July 1st. And this is a simple plugin, and this is the only plugin we have here about InfoSecEnforcer. You should get ready by July 1st, 2020. And if you want to schedule a rollout with us, just call us and we could get started. This is very simple. Now, let me introduce Brad Hammer, founder and attorney at Wakaris Group. Brad?
Hi, DV, thanks. Yeah, hi, as you said, I'm Brad Hammer. I'm founder at the Wakaris Group. I started in big law at a large law firm practicing regulatory and data privacy law, and really wanted to, several years ago, almost 5 years ago now, wanted to really focus in on data privacy and cybersecurity compliance advising. So I started my own shop, trying to just keep businesses in compliance and really understand businesses and their approach well to give them programs that fit what they need without doing too much and do it without doing too little as well. So,
great, thank you, Brad. Hey, my name is DV. I'm the founder of InfoSecEnforcer, and I also wrote a book on CCPA compliance, and we'll talk about that quickly. And I have a lot of experience in security. I've done a lot of security products and worked with a number of tech companies in the Silicon Valley. Now, as most of you already know, just to give you a quick primer, and then we'll jump into the Zoom privacy policy review, and gives you an idea what are the things that you should consider about privacy policy when you write up your privacy policy for CCPA compliance. The law has been on the books since 2018, almost 2 years now, and the enforcement is set to begin on July 1st this year. And obviously, it's already effective Jan 1st, so there's nothing stopping from a number of other things. So what are the risk factors? Before that, I would like to say that I wrote the book on the CCPA compliance, and it's on Amazon. You could buy a Kindle copy or a paperback or unlimited Kindle, you can read it. We do run promotions often for a free Kindle copy, so look out for that, and you will get an email in your mailbox and download that copy as well. So there are two risks we typically talk about when it comes to CCPA compliance. One is the enforcement risk, which is quite real. And the Attorney General of California basically stated that they will start enforcement action, in July 1st, 2020.
Despite several companies requesting difference, but to no avail yet on any extension on enforcement. So
right. Despite the COVID extension requests.
Correct. It's having no impact on the Attorney General's opinion at the moment. So
exactly, it seems like it. It seems to have swayed in the direction of more privacy required because of COVID.
Exactly.
Pushing out enforcement because of COVID. So this is a big one, right, Brad? And this second big one is obviously the class action. What do you think about more class action coming together? I think I've seen about 7 or 8 class action suits coming in, Brad.
Yeah, they are starting to ramp up, and it's interesting to see, in some cases, sort of ones originating out of CCPA, and then CCPA giving class actions that may already have been, may have come regardless, but more additional cause of action and an actual actionable cause of action and means of recovering some funds for individuals. So we're certainly seeing the impact already just a few months in.
The other thing, I had talked to some trial attorneys recently, And I was asking them, I mean, given a class action lawsuit, what does it take, for anything to come to trial and come to conclusion? His notion is that nearly 80-90% of all of these things usually get settled out of court, because
Yeah.
neither side knows, if they go to jury trial, neither side knows what the outcome is going to be, so they don't want to take a chance, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's frequently the case with class actions that are associated with data breaches. Is one, you want to be one of the first ones to file because you're the one that gets all the sort of first in line, and then two, yeah, the aim is free, and I say this as somebody who does not file class actions. Yeah, the aim is frequently to settle at some point in time because it keeps legal fees down. It gets payment to plaintiffs quicker.
Right.
Otherwise, you end up in court for 4 or 5, 6 years, however long, to actually take it all the way to trial. So.
Right. So let's now get into the CCPA privacy policy review, and we've taken the example of Zoom. I think we've taken the Zoom example because I think it's a lot in the news recently about privacy and issues associated with privacy and security, number one. And they've suddenly started to do a lot of stuff towards that. And they have a 90-day plan. The CEO is actually on top of it, et cetera, et cetera. So we can review much of that, right? And so how does this review help potential businesses to do their own privacy policy review? How does this help, Brad?
Yeah, and I think Zoom's a great example because I think that a lot of what we're seeing from the lawsuits that are coming out of Zoom, it's some growing pains of a company that was not small, but that has suddenly had to grow considerably overnight. I mean, part of the reason we're using it is that we're on the Zoom platform right now, right? It's a great example to use. And it also provides, as you pointed out, in addition to what you pointed out, DV, just some interesting talking points in terms of the type of service it is and the different issues that they've had to address in it. So, neither DV nor I represent Zoom in any way. We were really just looking for a policy that we thought would provide a good discussion here. So, any critiques we're providing are based on sort of like our own expertise, in terms of sort of best practices and predictions about how we think CCPA might be interpreted, right? So it's not, we're aiming at highlighting a few specific items in the privacy policy. This isn't legal advice. You're not going to find out exactly what your privacy policy needs to be front to back, but really some good talking points to chew on in terms of some of the more difficult issues, because so much of CCPA is unsettled, and where we critique it, the Zoom policy, we're not necessarily, it's not to say that they're doing it wrong and that they're going to be fined for a particular action. This is an unsettled point of law, and or the regs are not finalized yet or something like that, and looking at it and how it might be interpreted and how we might advise somebody if similarly situated. So.
Right. And we decided to look at it from the perspective of what is the approach they have taken and is it readable? Readability is one of the criteria for the CCPA enforcement aspect of it, right? And we also decided that there are certain things that the law requires you to do, disclose and provide notice on, like where do you collect the data, what are the sources of data, what are the categories of data, do you share/sell to third parties, and what type of categories of third parties do you sell it to? So that's one area, right? And specifically for SaaS or service provider companies, there's obviously, you pointed out, Brad, there's a question of defining responsibilities in saying, okay, the tenant or the customer on the SaaS platform is responsible for their data and what they collect and what they store. For example, recordings, right? So that, and obviously there are some things missing and some things we want to point out what to do, how to do that. slightly different from what Zoom's privacy policy might be. And again, at this point of time, the intention of looking at Zoom is not to see what a big company does, but to see what it should look like and what we like about it and what we don't like about it and what could potentially change. And for small companies, things are going to be different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So let me share the Zoom website. This is the Zoom website, obviously. And, and you can see there are several places, right? The privacy and security is one area that they highlight here on their homepage. Privacy and legal policies. This is where we will focus most of our attention. And we'll also focus our attention on do not sell my personal information. There's supposed to be an icon in front of it, but that's okay. At least there is something in here, right? So shall we dive into this area?
Let's dive in. Yep. So yeah, as DV pointed out, they present an interesting example because the policy, and this is sort of a holistic piece that I can talk about as DV gets in there, because there's nothing specific specific language I'm going to point to here, but they have to, the policy needs to address at least two separate sort of points of collection, right? In the sense that there's the website where you as a customer might be going and visiting the website and giving them information and asking for marketing materials or whatever else it might be. But then there's the service itself, right? There's the application itself where the meetings are actually taking place, which is its own, has its own set of collections that are really taking place. And if you read the policy, and I start there because if you read the policy sort of front to back, the entirety of it, they do distinguish the two as you're reading through. So I'll give them credit that they do I would say a good job of helping to understand where that's, what's being collected in what place. One of the things I sort of struggle with from the readability standpoint is the degree to which I want to get to some information about, here's the collection, this is what's being collected by just the app. There's not really a way to jump in and just look at that, or what's being collected just by the website. Right. And that's sort of a subjective in the sense that what does readability look like to any one person? But and we'll get into more of this later. But in the position of a software provider company, when you're trying to facilitate potentially others providing notice to their own customers and et cetera, it makes it a little bit harder to navigate some of that readability.
Right. So here I find that obviously this was recently updated, March 29th, right? Which I also think that they probably did a lot of updates as a result of the privacy issues they are facing, and they probably just quickly figured out how to get everybody on the same page on this. I don't see kind of a summary element of it. Like, we don't sell your personal data, your meetings are yours and meetings are recorded at your choice, kind of providing a quick summary here, right? I usually don't see that in privacy policies. So this is nice from a point of view, to give the consumer, the user, a way to basically say, okay, what about my privacy? What is it that you're doing with it, right? Just saying we are committed to protecting is not sufficient enough, in my opinion, but to actually detail out. Obviously, this could be bigger font, et cetera, et cetera. That aside, the information is available here, and this I like, which I typically don't in many policies, right?
No, obviously, and it also helps them distinguish something that we aren't even going to get into, which is this idea that this platform is being used by K-12 organizations and colleges and that. So,
which is the
COPA, because it's for kids under 13, and FERPA, which is education records.
Right.
We won't delve into that, but I think that that's very useful in that they actually have a separate policy addressing that.
Exactly, because they focused on the K to 12 a lot, and that makes it easier for them. From a structurally point of view, they provide all of this, right? So, collection of data, which is getting into our second point, right? So you need to know, you need to disclose and provide notice on, how are you collecting the information? Where are you collecting it from? What type of information are you collecting? That kind of stuff, right? So they basically say information that identifies you, who uses it, examples, etc., account data, content.
And they break
it down.
And they break this in. They break this into two. One thing I like this sort of spreadsheet approach. It's really easy to look at. It's really easy to read.
Exactly.
And then they also divide. They have two separate sets of spreadsheets, right? So it's this what we have here, which in the sort of sentence above it says this is the information that we collect directly from you. And then it has another set, the next spreadsheet, which is information that the system collects sort of automatically. Which is also useful. One thing that they do here that is, one critique that I would make of this approach in terms of they've done it is they're not distinguishing what a website might be collecting. So that might not be personal information from what is personal information. So they lump all data together, right? And so it's good because in one sense you can go to one spot and it's like, okay, here's everything that's collected. This is what's collected for me. If you want to scroll down, DV, there's what's collected automatically. The issue being some of this stuff on location and operating system, and that I would assume, and based on reading this, I know at least some of these data elements are being collected sort of in aggregate, right, and not necessarily tied to a person. And so where that becomes while it's nice presented like this, where it might become a challenge for them, and I don't know, is if someone is asking for access to all of their information, right, under CCPA, or deletion of all of their information under CCPA, the degree to which they've lumped all of this together, if they give somebody a download of all their information and there are certain elements missing, like location or something like that, because it's aggregated and not tied to their name, that might create confusion. And so that's one critique of this is that the degree to which they haven't sort of separated out what's personal information, what's not, and that might be intentional on their part because the definition under CCPA is so sort of at least somewhat unclear. So it's very broad, exactly.
Very broad. They also start, I also like this element of it. They say we conduct anonymized aggregated analytics, so they're already basically saying there are a lot of anonymization we are doing, a number of things that we are anonymizing already, even before the teams who look at the performance or service performance or whatever they might be looking at. So that's another nice element of it. So there are good sides of it. I don't think anybody can get this perfect, in my opinion.
No.
So
that's right.
Your best effort to get it right. And
it's best effort based on what you're doing. Sort of DV. I know this is your approach on the IT side. It's my approach on the legal side.
Right.
Understand what the business is actually doing and presenting it in a way that makes the most sense for that business.
I think Zoom here, to some extent, I have not seen this level of detail in other privacy policies from large brands. But Zoom has gone a lot more detail, with respect to how they're categorizing data, what is the information they are collecting, and what are they collecting it for, et cetera, et cetera. So if somebody can actually look at this and follow similar stuff, it'll be much easier, faster, better. I think this is a really nice best practice to put in there, right? The next piece is, I think you wanted to talk about service provider companies on how they should differentiate. So this is the area there, right? So recordings, especially because recordings are done by the hosts and not necessarily by the company.
Yep.
You know, there is information that the hosts have, not the company has. There is that element of it also comes into play. What do you think we should, you know, is this disclosure sufficient? You know,
You know, I think that the disclosure is, I think it's sufficient. I think it creates, so it's interesting in that it is putting the onus on, say, you know, DV, you're listed as the host, right? In this case, and what this policy, you know, if you're reading it, says there are certain things that we're responsible for, but in reality, DV is responsible for telling you, you know, is this being recorded? You know, how is your information being treated? That type of thing, which is interesting that they have put them, you know, in the sense that throughout this policy, they state that they are what, you know, they call themselves a processor, which is a GDPR term, or a service, the equivalent term being a service provider under CCPA, right? So they are trying to firmly throughout this policy put themselves in the bucket of saying, you know, we are supporting and facilitating other companies using our platform, which is very true. But they also do not, they don't, there are also scenarios where, you know, the degree to which they're engaging directly with companies, they have a significant amount of information that they might be using for marketing material or something else, where they are actually the controller as well, which I think is somewhat less clear in their policy. I think that from their position as a service provider, they do a great job in here of explaining what their responsibility is, and what, as compared to the host of the meeting, right? But then it's a little bit muddier when you get into, if I am the owner of a company and I've just signed up for Zoom and I'm going to send them the list of employees that I want to have access to, or upload my list of employees I want to have access, how is that being treated differently potentially than who I might be inviting to a meeting? So, but that's this game that companies like Zoom have to play, where they are wearing both hats, right?
Exactly. So this cannot be looked at it. I mean, if you really think about it, I think they have done a very good job. I think they have done it recently. I have not seen this level of detail on Zoom's privacy policy. You know, in December, I was looking at some of this stuff earlier. I have not seen it, but they've done a very good job recently to clean it up and have it ready. You know, I think I want to get to the cookie policy shortly, but I want to say something important here. When they do initial signups with customers, you typically get this check here for, you know, you look at this policy, look at that policy. I don't think many people would have any idea on what they are looking at. They look at it and say, okay, it seems nice, go on, move on. You know, it is the responsibility of the company to do appropriate disclosures, not the other way around. When the user signs up, right? So it's more important from a CCPA perspective, the responsibility of the company to adhere to the policies they actually disclose on their websites. It's important that you have the back-end processes and systems and checks and balances to make sure the people are doing what the policy says they're doing. So that's one element of it, right? Now, so let's divulge into what I don't like. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but we don't have too much time. Let's divulge into personally what I don't like, what I see is missing in this whole thing, right? That do not sell my personal information piece. Okay, right on the top, this, you know, they say, hey, we don't sell your personal data. Okay, fine. If you don't sell our personal data, by default, you have this do not sell. Why do I see this cookie opt-out stuff? You know, number one is that.
So they are taking the most extreme view of what's deemed a sale of data under CCPA. And in their defense, the regulators, by sort of putting in and then taking out and putting in language around website tracking data and whether or not it's you know, a sale of data, you know, in their defense, the regulator hasn't done a good job of helping us figure this out yet. And so they are I would assume in an abundance of caution, taking the approach that cookies, when placed in, you know, and what's tracked via cookies, is deemed a sale of data. And they sort of, they have a couple paragraphs in their policy where they sort of hash this out a bit, right? Because they say, we don't sell your data, we clearly don't sell your data, but just in case cookies are a sale of data under CCPA because it's not clear, we have a button you can click, you can opt out of cookies. Yeah, it's not even, I would say it's difficult because then when you click this, you know, does this conform to what a web form to opt out of a sale would need to be under CCPA regs anyway?
Yeah, it doesn't.
Right, and so that's the difficulty here. One is taking in sort of an extreme view, and I don't want to say it's a wrong view. It's because it's not clear, but it is the strictest view, which is to say cookies are a sale of data. But then the execution is to use this tool that I've seen before, which is intended for European cookie law, because Europe actually requires this type of opt-out, right? And so some service providers that have this cookie opt-out tool sort of adapted it to be a CCPA do not sell tool. And the degree to which that's correct or incorrect, I guess we'll see. But it's a lot. Yeah,
is distinctly different, right? Number one, okay, first, if you don't sell data, just disclose that you don't sell data, and that's fine. But still, you have the do not sell my personal information and put it up, do the intake of that particular person, right? Send the note, we don't sell personal information, right?
Right.
So as a result, but you still have a record of the fact that a person, a consumer has come to you and says, don't sell my data, that you have a record. And if in the future, right, if it turns out that your company wants to change the business model, you want to become a media company or whatever, you have a list of people who said, consumers who sent you something and said, don't sell my data. You have that list to check against that, right? So
absolutely.
My thing, when I looked at this whole thing and I looked at several companies pushing cookie opt-out stuff as part of CCPA, I just got livid. I mean, because it's too much. It's asking too much of companies to do too many things at the same time when the law doesn't require you to do that. That's number one. Number two is the law is not intended to reduce or remove or put a barrier to all the advertising and marketing things that a company needs to do. So like, for example, remarketing campaigns, or you need to put some pixels and you need to do some tracking to make sure you can actually market to consumers in the right fashion. So the law doesn't obviate that usage, right? They're basically saying don't sell the data. You know, it was very clear about what you're selling to a third party about, right? So because of that, this, I think, I frankly don't like this approach with respect to leveraging it from the perspective of do not sell my personal information. That's the only, that's one of the only, criticisms I have with the privacy policy and how they have disclosed this stuff here.
No, I agree. And one of the, and like a good point that you made, which is the degree to which you have to be keeping a record. I don't know what does the back end of that cookie opt-out look like in terms of having a clear record of do not sell requests. And the other issue with this sort of CC is cookie opt-out, and that, which DV we talked about, is if the regulator decides that they're going to make you go retroactive and say everyone you sold data to in the last 3 months, you have to tell them, you have to sort of claw it back and tell them not to use it or something to that effect.
Correct.
I don't know that this achieves that either. So it's a
right.
Yeah, it's not easy to say the least, but I think that we're in agreement that that's one of the things that we really didn't care for in terms of that interpretation. So
cool. I think we've covered all the topics that we were going to discuss. I think it's the Zoom's privacy policy is pretty good. I like the tabular form that they do, the collection category sources and that kind of stuff. They clearly define the responsibilities from the perspective of tenants, etc. There's not many significant things missing. Do you see any other missing pieces in there that we didn't cover?
The only other sort of two things that are still in draft regulation form, so it's not clear, which is the draft regulations for CCPA currently require that you define your process for verifying someone's identity and define your process for affirming an authorized agent. I understand why that's maybe not in there right now, in part because I think everybody's waiting for some guidance from the regulator in terms of how both of those processes will work, or what the preferred process for that will be. And so I don't know, it's not in that the policy is out of compliance, because those regulations aren't in place yet. But those are things that are in the draft regulations that it'll be interesting to see for everybody who's trying to keep up with this. And as you can see, as we saw, this one was changed at the end of March, right? So they're clearly actively working on this. So.
Exactly. So let's see if we have any questions. We have very few participants, so maybe we can open it up and see if you have any questions. Okay, I guess we don't have any questions. And Brad, thank you. Any last words? And I want to close the webinar. Any last words from you?
I don't think so. I think that you summed it up well. I think it's overall it's a good policy. They did a good job with it. There's just it was a good example for us to work through today. So okay.
Last pitch again, if you want to get ready by July 1st, just give us a call. We can schedule a rollout. We can do a phased approach. Within a matter of a couple of weeks, you can get the enforcement portion of the stuff ready. And phase 2 would be trying to help you guys out with the workflow and how the whole thing should do. And phase 3, probably a little more long-term, is to look at data breach prevention and some security issues associated with that. Okay. Hey, Brad, thank you very much. Thank you for who have joined us. Appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, give us a holler. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.